S'asseoir tous deux au bord du flot qui passe, les voir passer, tous deux s'y glissent un nuage dans l'espace, les voir glisser. À l'horizon s'il fume en toit de chaume, les voir fumer aux alentours si quelques fleurs en baume, sans l'embaumer, entendre à pied du sol le murmurer, ne pas sentir ton que ce rêve durer, le temps durer, mais la pourtant n'est pas si en profonde, qu'à s'adorer sans nous souci de querelle du monde, les ignorer et seuls tous deux devant tout ce qui lasse, sans se lasser, sentir l'amour devant tout ce qui passe, n'est point passé. Sentir l'amour devant tout ce qui lasse, n'est point passé.
Hello, everyone. My name is Saman de Silva, and the piece you just heard me perform was Au bord de l'eau by Gabriel Fauré, which roughly translates into At the Edge of the Water. As you might have guessed, I am here to talk to you about opera, an industry you might know for being too boring, too long, too archaic, or too inaccessible. But today I'm not here to talk to you about those. No, you can consult many different talks that will tell you why or why not those are misconceptions. Instead, I want to talk to you about how diversity in opera and the performing arts in general are on the brink of a revolution, and how you can play your part in making sure that it does happen. As a young singer, I've learned that I have to prove myself before training my voice in higher education. Competitions and summer programs are some examples, and I've had the pleasure of partaking in a few. And at these competitions, the best part is meeting different singers. Different people who come from vastly different backgrounds, and it is just fascinating to see the birth of a generation of performers. In the Bay Area, it just so happens that we all come from various ethnic backgrounds as well. You know, I didn't really think about the diversity factor between each of the Black, Latinx, Caucasian, and Asian singers. I just assumed, well, this is opera in America, right? You see, I had my rude awakening at the beginning of quarantine, when the Metropolitan Opera announced they would be holding free nightly streams of some of their most well-received productions. The Metropolitan Opera, the Met for short, is considered the pinnacle of North American opera. If you ask any young American singer where they want to be in 20 years, you'll get the same response. Standing on the stage of the Met, bellowing an aria to an audience of thousands. And this is why I was so excited. I was, in essence, going to meet my heroes. Yet, stream after stream, I found my interest dwindling. And I was met by my nearly all-white casts, one after another, with a handful of singers of color featured in the chorus and hardly ever as leading roles or soloists. Now, don't get me wrong, the music was impeccable, and these singers are among the best in their field. I have no intent to besmirch the legacy of some of the best opera singers of the 21st century. And there was a reason why they were standing on that stage, ethnicity aside. But there was always something missing. This wasn't the opera that I knew, nor was it the atmosphere that I saw at my competitions. Quite frankly, this wasn't the industry that I thought I was entering. And this was all until the Met decided to stream a production featuring Sri Lankan soprano Danielle Denise, a then 19-year-old opera singer featured in one of Mozart's most renowned operas, The Marriage of Figaro. I watched and cherished every single moment of the production. It was partially because I saw someone on stage that looked like me, and partially because this was the opera that I knew. Of course, the subsequent streams featured the same type of casts, but seeing Danielle Denise, a woman of my heritage, inspired me to do some digging. So I combed through the records of prior performances at the Met and discovered that there were only 2 South Asians in the history of the Metropolitan Opera to ever perform leading roles. Let that sink in. In 140 years of opera, there have not been 2 South Asian leads at the Met. I was bewildered and, quite frankly, disappointed. This realization forced me to grapple with the fact that either no 3 South Asians had ever deserved to rise to the pinnacle of North American opera, or there were significant structural barriers in place that prevented the rise of non-white opera singers. The thing is, there's lots of nuance in tackling this issue. It's pretty easy to think diversity good, racism bad, but the intricacies of things like tokenism make this a Pandora's box to open. Administrators have long been asking themselves, how can we put a minority on stage for the sake of their artistry and musical prowess, and not for their skin color? And to what extent are we evaluating one's skin color too much? And these are 2 really good questions with a list of possible answers. However, the hard thing about this is that unlike a disease or the flu, you can't make a diagnosis and issue a treatment. Instead, most singers have found it easier to pinpoint the symptoms and treat the disease from there. The breadth of racism in opera and the performing arts in general is just so deeply ingrained that making a few small changes and hoping it solves everything is far too naive. So what are the problems, you might ask? Well, I'll break it down into 2 possibly overgeneralized categories. The first, opera needs to confront its past. And the second is what I spent the last few minutes outlining. There are not enough singers of color featured on the stages of today. Take a second to consider you are an artist. You can be a visual artist, author, composer, poet, novelist, whatever you decide. And you decide to make a work of art. You know that your success and life depends on drawing in audiences to view said piece of art. Because of this, you also know that audiences are attracted to exotic and fantastic tales. So you decide to set your work of art in an indescribably exotic place. Just like George Lucas took us to a galaxy far, far away, you're going to take us to a country far, far away. How about Japan? And now, hopefully, I just lost you. Because unlike the 19th century, we don't gawk at foreign cultures. We don't look at Superman in the same light we do Indian people, because, well, quite frankly, that would be weird. But we have to understand that that's how things were back then. Composers were once fascinated by far-off places because they had little to no exposure to them, and they knew that the exotic storylines would draw in a larger audience. Nowadays, we need to learn to move on from these old and possibly harmful tropes. It's not so much retiring an opera as much as it is reframing the context in which it can be performed. For instance, being a certain actor doesn't warrant coloring makeup to ensure you look the culture you're playing. Erasing the practice of sun-kissing Caucasian singers just highlights the fact that there is an unfilled seat beckoning for singers of color on the stages of today. And finally, it's important to add people of the native culture when producing foreign set operas, specifically on the creative team. This way, they can ensure that the culture is not mocked, vilified, or caricaturized by the time curtain goes up. And it's the simple things like these that just require a conversation to get the ball moving. This will then eradicate the bitter sense of prejudice that has long sat on the tongue of our most beloved operas. And this is the first step towards equity. This is the first step towards being able to say that opera is going to be more broadly accessible to an audience that never sees its culture represented on stage. And it will also be more broadly accessible to singers of color who feel unwelcome in the industry. But there's still a crucial piece of the pie missing, the part that will guarantee singers of color safety, equal value, and respect in comparison to their Caucasian counterparts. And this is the part where a lot of people have gotten stuck. It's not that we don't have an answer, not at all. Really, these answers have been circulating for the past years. It's just that we've been lacking in impetus. Unfortunately, said impetus came at the expense of lives lost in reigniting the Black Lives Matter campaign. Fortunately, many empowered Black singers have taken to national outlets to express that the framework of the industry is not right. For instance, Karen Slack, one of America's most famous sopranos, recently said, "I'm not looking for your seat. I'm asking that you move over so I can sit in mine, and you be okay with that." And this is the attitude that I believe is going to inspire compromise and change in the long term. Singers of color have long been lamenting the lack of non-white administrators. If there is a person of color on a judging panel or audition panel, the more likely it is that a singer of color is not going to face prejudice before they even take on a role. The same goes for students who study at some of the most prolific music conservatories and feel ostracized when there's no one of their ethnicity. And this is where you come in. You as the consumer, and you as the layperson with relatively no idea how to consume opera, whether you're interested or not. At this moment, we are in the process of cultivating a generation of singers that are going to tear down the barriers of our old generations. Right now, there are 2 Black men heading 2 of the most prolific voice programs in the nation. And Ayoon-sun Kim, a fantastic female Korean conductor, was just recently granted directorship of our own San Francisco Opera, the nation's 2nd largest opera company, second only behind the Met. And there are definitely tremendous strides such as these in progress right now. And I am immensely hopeful that aspiring musicians will not face nearly the same obstacles as their predecessors had. But these initiatives lack continual support. And this issue isn't strictly confined to opera. In fact, almost every other Western performing art has reevaluated where it stands to grow with regard to diversity. Theater, ballet, opera, musical theater, and classical instrumentalists are all trying to develop their diversity while simultaneously taking heavy fire from the pandemic. So the pressure is on you, the consumer, to decide whether you are going to actively further diversity in the performing arts or you are going to sit on the sidelines and let someone else do it for you. In a business model, the more demand and support you can express for performers of color, the more likely the company is to reproduce that same work or feature those same artists. Your actions can be as small as viewing more of a distinct art form you enjoy. An influx of viewership will secure more philanthropy and thus open the doors up to more singers of color. You can specifically target your viewership to endorse performances written, produced, directed, and performed by singers of color. For opera, I would say search up famous opera singers. Discover who and what you do or don't like. Try listening to opera while you study, or maybe take baby steps and discover the hidden predecessor to pop music that is art song. And maybe opera just isn't your thing, and that's completely fine. Go try classical music, or theater, or ballet, or so many performing arts that need you as a consumer to help them secure a better future for artists of color, especially during this time. The playbill is really in our hands to patronize and revitalize the arts. It is up to you to bring the performing arts out of antiquity into representing modern society as it stands, an amalgamation of diverse people like us. But it also ends with you. It ends with us, losing track of where society stands to gain, and forgetting how big and instrumental of a role we play in ensuring society continues to grow. As world-renowned mezzo-soprano Janai Bridges once said, "I don't want this to be a hashtag or a one-time thing. I want this to be an ongoing conversation. Forever." Thank you.